How's it going?
Hi, Timothy. Hey, Jason. Great to be back.
How are you?
Good. It's night number 42.
41.
41. Okay.
41.
I'll make sure about that.
I have a confession to make. This is episode 41 or 42. We're confirming. I still have no idea what the best thing to say is when we open the show. I get so nervous every time.
Why do you get nervous? You shouldn't get nervous.
I don't know.
41.
Last week
41.
was 40.
I do, though. I get so nervous every time. I'm like, I'm good until the last 10 seconds. And then I'm like, oh, what am I going to say? What am I going to do? And then you guys show up and it's all good. But let's talk about, for a second, the talk that you gave last week.
Yeah. What about it?
How beautiful it was.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. It was amazing. It was in a very beautiful place called Collinstown in County Westmeath, and literally standing at the side of a lake as the sun was going down. It was amazing. But the amount of people that showed up was unbelievable. I mean, that was the most amazing thing of all. And they came from everywhere. And even when I started to talk, there was still streaming in from the car park. So it was just like it was an ocean of love beside a lake as the sun was set. That's how I describe it.
That's awesome. Yeah, the visuals on that, the photographs that came back from that with the sun setting behind you, they were absolutely gorgeous.
Yeah, I had a videotape of it, but it came out terrible. So I just had to use the audio in the end. But I didn't see the sunset. It was at my back. But yeah, it was, and it was like, kids were swimming in the lake. I can't believe it. They must be hard up there because I imagine the water's still pretty cold at this time of year. But there was birds flying around me and everything. I felt like fucking Saint Francis of Assisi or something.
It was the warmth from the sun and just how amazing that talk went that I think people were just feeling a little bit more comfortable.
Yeah, and it was also to remind people that they survived something unbelievably difficult. We all did. Those of us who what we had, we held. It was true. And so it was sort of like a victory party as well that, you know, celebrate your resolve. But it was just nothing bad about it. It was just all beautiful.
Yeah, it was a celebration for sure. And I think maybe that's why people could go into the cold water and not feel uncomfortable. It was a good feeling all around.
Yeah, and the amount of drink people threw to me was afterwards was unbelievable.
You were well oiled.
Yeah, and I still managed to climb to the top of the mountain. Well, it's a Fishtail Mountain, it's 1,000 feet high, Loch Crew the next day. So to see the megaliths on top of that. So so it wasn't too bad. Yeah, I didn't
Grand
go
time.
nuts. I paced myself.
I still think it would have been awesome if you could have emerged from the lake to start the talk that way. Looking out over the lake.
I realized that I was going to be standing with the lake. Yeah, I would have done it too. I like to see people in Doctor Who. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Tentacles and all. But I do want to thank all of our Patreon subscribers. You guys are awesome for sending all of your money our way. We really appreciate it. And again, all of you tuning in live on Facebook right now, it's awesome to have you guys in the chat. We've got a window pane open here with the chat going on the whole time. So thank you all for showing up to the Facebook live stream.
Not sure who keeps sending the mad emoji reaction. I'm not sure what you're mad about, but I hope that at some point you can find some resolve because we're not here to make you mad.
Yeah, and it also messes up the Facebook algorithm, and I'm sure that's why you're doing it.
Well, I just don't want anybody to be mad. And if they are, it's your own problem, to be honest.
There it is.
Yep. Okay, here we go. Indigenous elders share story about the star people that crashed on their reservation. Dr. Artie Sixler Clark is a professor emeritus at the Montana State University and former director of the Center for Bilingual Multicultural Education. Dr. Clark, who is Cherokee Choctaw, has worked with Indigenous people for most of her career and has some amazing stories to tell. Here is a great quote at the beginning of her book, Encounters with Star People, Untold Stories of American Indians. I first learned about the Star People when my grandmother told me the ancient legends of my people. My childhood reality included narratives that traced the origins of the indigenous people of the Americas to the Pleiades, stories of little people who intervened in people's lives, and legends about the magical gift of the DNA of the Star People that flowed in the veins of the indigenous tribes of the earth. I embrace the stories of the celestial visitors who lived among the Indian people as part of my heritage. In her book, she shares many stories, and one of them comes from a gentleman named Harrison. She writes, located in the states of North and South Dakota, Wyoming, Idaho, and Montana, the Northern Plains Indian tribes have many accounts about UFOs. The story in this chapter is told by a well-respected elder of a Northern Plains tribe. His encounter predates the crash at Roswell. Since I recorded this story, Harrison has passed, but the time I spent with them over the years has changed my life. Harrison told a story of how his grandfather took him on a spaceship in the summer of 1945. He said he was 12 at the time and explained how the Army Corps of Engineers came to the reservation around the summer of 1947 to survey the river and surrounding areas for the reservoir. So originally, there was no reservoir. The Corps confiscated the land and in return gave Harrison's grandfather a worthless piece of land on the other side of that butte. I spent every summer on his place from the time I was 6 years old. Mom and Pop both worked for the tribe and they didn't want me home alone during the summers. So every May I packed 2 paper bags, one with a change of clothes and the other with books, marbles, and my toy gun. My folks dropped me off to live with Gramps from June to late August. I loved my summers there, even the isolation. I was the only child for miles. I rode horses and herded cattle, helped with chores, whatever I could do. As I got older, there were bigger chores and more responsibility. There was no TV or videos like kids have today. At night, Gramps amused me with the ancient myths and legends of our people. Clark's relationship with Harrison grew over the years, and the two of them met when his school district requested her assistance in applying for a federal grant. Harrison was her contact and was responsible for escorting her around the reservation. She explains, it took nearly 25 years of visits before Harrison asked me if I believed in star people. She replied with a yes, and then he said, someone told me you collect stories about the star people, and I find that unusual. She replied, I've been collecting stories for a few years. I grew up hearing the ancient stories of the star people from my grandmother. Everywhere I go, I am among indigenous people. I ask them about their stories of UFOs and star people. Perhaps someday I will write a book. I've heard some amazing accounts from American Indians. Harrison then offered to take her grandfather's place, where he shared an incredible story that took place on his grandfather's ranch before the Army Corps of Engineers became involved. He told a story his grandfather told him about a spaceship that crashed on his property. Harrison said, I saw the ship. I went aboard it. It was a long cylinder about 30 feet wide and 60 feet long. I measured it by pacing it off. Most of it stuck inside a butte close to a water level. It was well camouflaged. You can't see the butte now. It was covered by water when the Corps of Engineers flooded the valley, creating the reservoir. The crash shook the ground so hard that Gramps thought the house was going to collapse. You can still see a crack in the foundation of the log cabin that Gramps said occurred when the spaceship crashed. The horses were so frightened that it took a month to round them up, and even then, they were constantly trying to escape. At first, Gramps thought it was an earthquake, but when he cleared, he saw the craft. It hit with such force that only a small section stuck out of the butte. But Gramps not only had a keen eye, he knew this land like the back of his hand. The smallest disturbance caught his attention. For the longest time, he sat on the butte watching for any sign of life. He kept a vigil for days. Finally, after a week or so, he ventured off to the place of impact. His grandfather told him that the Starmen, who crashed and survived there, lived in their craft for approximately 5 months before another ship came and rescued them. At the time of the crash, the closest ranch to our place was 12 miles away. And as fate would have it, those neighbors had moved out of state days before the crash occurred. Gramps delighted in keeping the Starmen's presence a secret. Harrison explained that the first time his grandfather approached them, he did so by taking them an offering of food. They told him they do not eat flesh. He described them as taller humans, at least 7 to 8 feet tall and very white. He described them as being so white that you could almost see inside them. I'm not sure what he meant by that, except that their skin was thin. They had long, slender fingers, much longer than humans. Their hair was white. When the sun shined on it, Gramps said it looked like a halo surrounded their heads. He said that sometimes they looked like angels depicted in the paintings of his Bible, except they did not wear gowns. Their eyes, too, he said, they changed colors depending on the light. Furthermore, Harrison's grandfather described to him what they wrote. He was particularly interested in their clothes. They wore a one-piece light green outfit. He told me there were times he saw them wading in the river, and when he approached them, their suits were dry. He told me he wished he had a suit like that. When I think of the old man and how he viewed the star visitors, he did his best to describe what he saw. I'm sure if the same thing occurred today, the observers might offer a more sophisticated perspective. Harrison went on to explain that there were 14 of them and how his Gramps wasn't sure if all survived the crash. Harrison said that when he arrived in the summer, after the visitors had left, he went on board the craft and there were 17 of them. As far as what they were, Harrison said, Gramps said that he often saw the star people picking up rocks and plants. At first, when he saw him, they vanished before his eyes. He never discovered an explanation for that, but he wished that he had the power. Gramps thought that was the ultimate trait, simply to vanish in thin air when he wanted. I can't imagine how he planned to use it. And as time passed, Gramps said the starmen realized he meant no harm and they didn't disappear when he approached. Over time, it became clear to him that they were concerned about their craft and they did not want it discovered. His grandfather told him that the beings lived there from late November until April. According to him, another spaceship appeared on April 17th, 1945, and he never saw them again. He knew they were waiting for a rescue craft, so he expected it. He told me their spaceship was one of 4 exploring the Earth. They had been dropped off by a bigger ship that was circling Earth. The big ship will return for them, but not for some time. They just had to wait. They were not afraid they would be discovered. They could make themselves invisible, but they could not do the same with their spaceship. He said that his grandfather witnessed the pickup. He watched as they prepared to leave. Each of the stranded star travelers came to him and bowed before they left. He understood they appreciated his discretion. As far as why they were here, Gramps said they were voyagers and traveled the universe, observing life on other worlds. They had been coming to Earth for thousands of years, observing, collecting, and noting changes. One day, they took him aboard their craft and showed him pictures from their home. As he described it, I suspect it was some kind of TV or computer. But in my grandfather's day, there was no such thing, so he was enthralled by what he called a picture machine. He talked about flashing pictures that showed a place different from Earth. It reminded him of the Badlands, but with no vegetation. Their houses were underground. He asked them if it was heaven, and they told him they did not have a place such as heaven. He was fascinated by the picture machine and went back several times to view the pictures. Apparently, the star visitors told him they liked the green of Earth, and they thought the red willow that grew along the banks of the river was quite beautiful in April, and they loved the water. On their world, water was underground, nothing on the surface. My grandfather frequently collected geodes for them. They were amazed when he broke them open to reveal the crystallized cities inside. They were apparently pleased to add them to their collection. Gramps also taught them the medicinal uses of the red willow and how to propagate it from a small sample. As far as the craft goes, it was left there. It was well camouflaged to the point that nobody would really be able to recognize it with the naked eye unless they knew specifically what they were looking for. When he went inside the craft, he explained that when you sat in a chair, it melted around him as if it was alive. It enveloped the body like a warm hug and then released you when you wanted to get up. The craft also had what looked to be hieroglyphics. Eventually, the Army Corps of Engineers came and built their dam, which flooded the area where the craft was. He suspects they took the craft and we can find it no more.
I'll let you go with this one, Jason, because I'm still trying to process it.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say. I'm processing this as processing. I'll say it the American way, processing it. But the first thing that comes to mind is it is very interesting, the idea that an advanced race of beings would have a technology that would be more like that seat that you're talking about at the end that envelops the body. What's up? Organic. Thank you. That they would have a technology that's a little more organic, that when they have a ship, it wouldn't necessarily be built out of metal and stuff. It would look more like something that we would see in the most recent iteration of Dune, the way those ships almost kind of look like asteroids and almost kind of looked like Oumuamua, something like that. I know that a lot of these stories, however, get from all the UFO cults and everything, they get an overlay, just like any other oral tradition gets an overlay on it of the the starmen coming from space telling us to lay down our weapons and everything's all good, and kind of a Jesus-like message. However, there's got to be some merit to these stories that people like the Dogon and other people throughout the world. I even think there might be something in the Shinto philosophy from years ago about this. And if anybody knows, drop this in the comments. But there's the overlay that gets put on, especially in the media, especially whoever picks up the story. Perhaps whoever told the story, if this was, grandpa or something, might have had his Christian overlay, added onto it. And maybe his grandpappy, has a version of it that's a little less Jesus-like. And maybe these critters that come down from space are a little more nefarious. Just like the whole thing where people will talk about, say, Aleister Crowley being either all good or all evil, but it's like those of us who actually study Crowley realize there's a good side of Aleister Crowley and there's an evil side of Aleister Crowley, and that doesn't make him neither good nor evil, but what he did was tremendous nonetheless. We're not here to judge him as an individual, so it's kind of like in the society that we live in now, and there's this idea that somebody either needs to be totally good or totally evil. And I want to say that, with ETs and stuff, with entities coming and visiting the planet, they're not just going to be, either all peaceful or all loving and malevolent. There'll be benevolence as well. And then sometimes if there's people coming here to explore planet Earth, they're just here to explore. They're not necessarily going to be here telling people, what they need to be doing. And if something were to show up like that, I would imagine that, they'd be fascinated by things like geodes and fascinated by somebody opening up like an oyster in front of them and feeding it to them or something like that. But I still think that a lot of this gets overlaid with kind of an Abrahamic overlay, as everything does. Everything seems to, at some point, if there's any kind of spiritual technology or philosophy that gets brought into the public eye, the Jesuits or whomever it is puts an overlay on top of it that's always very much the Jesus story. So, Thomas, I'm curious to hear what you've thought about as you've marinated on this for a few minutes.
Well, when we were just researching for the Sasquatch film, we came across information very early on that the Native Americans considered Sasquatch to be a folk spirit, not an actual animal, not a person or an animal, but a folk spirit. And it wasn't until Roger Patterson came along that this whole thing of a missing ape was injected on top of it. And I think there could be something like that going here as well, that there could have been like a native folk spirit experience. And I have been hearing stories that in recent years that the Christian missionaries have left the reservations, and a lot of UFO cults are targeting First Nations people in US and Canada, particularly in the Southwest, with these stories of the Star Nations and so on. So they're being kind of indoctrinated into the UFO cults, the alien contactee cults. Now, this gentleman could have had a very real kind of folk spirit experience. In fact, most of it sounded like it was. And then we get the cliched story of the US military and, it's just metal tubes and all this kind of thing. And that seems to be like, that was almost like added to the story later. That's the way I feel about it. Or, the story is secondhand anyway. It's not directly from him. But I think I have heard some very sinister stuff. Apparently, someone was telling me that like alien abduction stuff and alien and UFO TV shows are absolutely massive in the reservations. And people there love all that stuff. They love all the alien stuff. They love all the ancient alien programs and all that stuff. And it's a big deal there, apparently. And maybe they're taking the folk, and what like they did with Sasquatch, the interlopers have taken the folk spirit of this Sasquatch and made it into an ape man, and maybe they're doing the same thing with the folk spirit of this River Valley and making it into spaceman. I'm just my theory, but I could be wrong.
So I'm from the Southwest, and no, I'm not Native. I didn't grow up on a reservation, but I do have Native relatives who are on like the Cochiti Reservation. And I do have family that lives there, and I've been to these places. I've been to Chaco Canyon many times. And there's no way that you can describe to somebody without actually being there what it feels like to go to these places, even though they're thousands and thousands of years since anybody's inhabited them. But you can go there and there's actually out where Chaco Canyon is, they call it the what is it? The Celestial Highway, because it's one of the darkest places on Earth where there's no light pollution and you can see the stars and everything like you can't see it anywhere else. And I've talked to some of the natives that have lived in these places. So there's one place, it's called Acoma Sky Pueblo, and that is one place that has been inhabited for the past 7,000 years. That's a little bit more south than Chaco Canyon, but you can go there and there's still elders that live there and they'll talk to you. Well, they won't always talk to you, but if they desire so, they will talk to you. And they'll tell you some of these things. But it still is that same thing where they won't let you all the way in. And this overlay that happens, it's just like with Celtic people or with anywhere, that whoever sort of won history sort of gets to write the narrative, right? And so much of that stuff was oral history that whatever gets written down is what gets remembered, but that doesn't mean that that's what happened. But if you get into these places and if you find a native who will actually talk to you, they still won't let you completely in, but even if they let you a little bit in, they will sort of reveal some of these things. And they very much believe that where they come from, some of them come from the inner earth and some of them come from the stars. It just depends on which tribe you're talking about. But out there in the Southwest, and maybe it's because they can see the stars and the night sky so much more clearly than most places on Earth. Most of their mythologies deal with people that come from the stars, and they believe it in their whole heart. And it's not a story to them. They understand and they know things that most people shouldn't know about the stars and the skies. And it's this genuine thing that you feel from them. And Thomas, I'm sure that you've met, some indigenous people from around Ireland that you don't have to ask them. You can feel it from them when they talk about, where they come from and what their history is and their ancestors and things like that. And one day I really hope to be able to bring you out to New Mexico, because that is a place that I always say this, there's only two places that I know for sure on Earth. And this time around for me that I feel very connected to. And the first one being New Mexico, and the second one is Ireland. I can go other places and feel great, but those are the only two places that I feel actually at home, and people just open their arms, and I can't explain it, but yeah, there's something that happens out there, and I don't pretend to even know what it is. And maybe this story is bullshit. Maybe it's half bullshit. I don't know, but the people that I've talked to that have these legends and these myths, they believe it. And it's not just that they believe it. It's like there's an energy that comes off of them when they're talking about it that makes you want to believe it too.
Oh, no,
it's so genuine.
I totally believe that too. You have to remember, there's also environmental factors involved as well. So in a country like where you're just talking about, where the stars are so bright, that's where all the focus would be. There's absolutely no Celtic star lore that I can find, none. Now, they have found the Nerba disc, but that's pre-Celtic. And that makes sense because it's cloudy here a lot of the time, so you wouldn't be able to have the same kind of star lore that you would in a country or a place where it's starlit all the time. In fact, in South America, the tribes there have in the Andes have the same situation, where the stars are just so powerful. And there's so many of them in the sky because of the lack of light pollution that the dark areas in the Milky Way, where the black interstellar gas exists, that's their constellations, is the black areas in between the stars, because there's just so many stars. Well, yeah, I know, I believe all that. I mean, things can evolve over time, and you will, like the Irish ancestry story. We don't have a founding mythology, but like things like the Tuatha De Danann, they came from the sea. So why? Because we're an island and we're surrounded by sea. So that makes sense too, where you live in the middle of the desert, you're surrounded by the sea of the sky. You would have to say, well, they couldn't have come from the earth, they must have come from up there. But I don't disbelieve them. I'm not saying they're not telling the truth or anything. I'm just saying you will find that everywhere you go, like you don't have a desert god in Scandinavia and you don't have a snow god in Turkey, well, in the Middle East. So environmental things do play a huge factor in all this as well. But that doesn't mean they're not true. It's just adds to the local aesthetic of it.
Yeah, and it's just one thing when you hear somebody, tell a story, and somebody can be a great storyteller and you're enthralled and you're invested and it's great. And then it's another thing when you hear an elder, say, for example, tell a myth. And there's just something about it. It resonates. And maybe it doesn't have to resonate with you because you're culturally different, but the way that it resonates with them when they tell you, it's such a beautiful experience. And it's just so much different than just hearing a regular story, if that makes sense.
Well, I look forward to hearing it one day.
Yeah, well, listen, my uncle, you would love him. My Uncle Lou, he was actually named Albuquerque Citizen of the Year in 2017, and he knows everybody. So when you come to visit, he's going to take us to all the different pueblos, and he's going to take us to all the different places, and you will meet some real elders. He's a great person.
Going along with that, what both of y'all said, it made me think the idea of, Thomas, you said the environmental thing, and this goes along with one of the other talks you've given before, Thomas, this idea of things switching on genetic memory or ancestral memory. And I'm of the opinion that genetics, as far as racial history, whatever you want to call it, has less to do with one's spiritual legacy, because in my opinion, I think we've all reincarnated throughout similar genetic lines most of the time, but I think some of us have incarnated through different genetic lines, and through that, the different mythologies, like we were talking about with this, that perhaps because in the Southwest they've got a better view of the sky, that there could be something switched on within their soul memory, for lack of a better term, about that. And people who do have a I mentioned the Dogon earlier, people who do have the ability to have some kind of celestial connection may have something switched on within them, where, like in your part of the world over there, Thomas, where there are the tremendous megaliths and an entire civilization based around that, there's going to be different things switched on with people dealing more with terrestrial earth-based entities, that going around the portal dolmens, going around the different megaliths, that there'll be different ancestral things, different memories switched on within people. And people out in the desert will have different things switched on, like in the Arabian desert or sub-Saharan Africa will have different things switched on. So
let's take that to the end zone, okay, or the metaphorical end zone, right?
Yeah,
we've agreed that there's an environmental issue involved in these mythologies, right? What if we jump out of the actual corporeal world and into the world of quantum physics and stuff like that? That these people manifest these entities according to the environmental imperative.
Like bring them back.
Yeah.
Like
there's
an energy
force. There's already an energy force there of some kind, but they are encapsulated within the environmental narrative of the area. So Pueblo Indians in the Southwest, like the Star People. In other cultures, they may be ice giants. They may be fairies from under the ground. They may be goblins in the forest. They may be anything.
But the they being the same prima materia, that the different
yes at the same consciousness, it encapsulates itself culturally and environmentally to what the locals expect or want or desire.
The entities themselves, like whether it's the jinn or the fairy or the whatever you want to call it.
It's just a theory, but it's an interest. It would explain a lot, that why you have these similar, ideas all over the world, but yet they look. For instance, you wouldn't have a snake god in Ireland, but just snake gods in Asia. the same kind of thing. It's the same, like I said, prima materia, the same underlying energy conscious force, but a combination of our consciousness projection and the environmental cultural factors creates a being that suits, that fills in the details or validates the narrative.
Yeah, it'd have to be organic to that culture.
Yeah.
To where it would make sense. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I still do wonder. Yes. So there are another they that people put different titles onto. And I made a video about this last summer. I want to say in like June or July, July. I made a video last August after right around the 4th of July about this concept that there are interdimensional beings that manifest as fairies, jinn, ghosts, whatever. And then what if there are other spiritual wildlife out there? If there's not just, because I think throughout history there's been a tendency to group things. There's an us and a them. That there's like there's us as human beings, there's our flora and fauna, and then there's the other. And then I sometimes wonder, well, is there a greater amount of spiritual and life force wildlife out there throughout the entire universe that might not all necessarily just be the same life force manifesting as a different archetype, the same way that like the people in North Africa would call them jinn, people in the Celtic world would call them fairy, people in somebody, a Wook from 2012 in the Southwest would call them a Pleiadian or something. Like it might all be the same thing. But what if there are other entities out there in the universe who might, not saying with this story, I'm going off on a different tangent, but are there other living beings out there that do exist outside of this solar system, outside of this galaxy, outside of this universe? And I would say the answer to that's yes. And it's not the same thing as the jinn or as the fairy or as the Pleiadians or something, the way that people have described them in modern mythology, but that there are different variations of life out there in the universe than just us in flesh meat bodies, and then people who are in plasma bodies, or whatever you want to call those other entities that show up in a non-physical form like Sasquatch and all those being one phenomena. And there could be entirely different groups of entities out there that do have some sort of flesh body or the ability to occupy a flesh or mechanical body, even that aren't these jinn and everything. So I think that we do interact with a particular race of beings that Rosemary Ellen Guiley was talking about with the jinn, and they do a lot of havoc. And I think a lot of people talk to them on Ouija boards. I think a lot of the channeling people who are talking to what they would call Pleiadians, they would be, these are just the jinn, the pathological spiritual wildlife that like turning on a lamp outside and a summer's night, you're going to get all these different bugs and stuff attaching around the light. There's going to be entities like that immediately go towards quote unquote spiritual people. And a lot of times that's the jinn. I think they'll also manifest as a consequence of your fears. Right. I'll give you an example of that. Sightings of sea monsters stopped or declined as people moved away from wooden ships to metal ships. And I had an encyclopedia from 1890, and it had sea monsters in the listing and said they exist. Now, and they said the sightings were now very rare in recent times, recent decades. And that's because I think when they were in the wooden ships, you're much more vulnerable. You're much more vulnerable to storms and everything. So you would probably manifest these fears on board the ship, and it might appear as a giant sea serpent or a giant sea monster. But as you move towards metal ships, where you're less vulnerable to being knocked out by the sea, like an animal in the sea knocking you over, the fear recedes and it lessens, and therefore sightings of sea monsters and giant sea serpents just vanish. But the thing is then moved on to something else. It's found, it finds fears somewhere else. But I think the pathological ones can manifest through fear, like they eat the fear, and they'll give you whatever you want, And I think the Hat Man is a good example of one of them we had last week or 2 weeks ago, and I think the sea serpents is another. But it'll also, beings of hope will also manifest, and I think that's very much what the native thing sounds like. It sounds like they're
you know, the people, they look towards, well, we have a brothers in the stars, a star nation.
Yeah, I'm just saying that there might be other entities that aren't the pathological ones. I would venture to think that there's a lot more variety in living life forces out there than just the pathological ones. I think there's some really easy to catch, you know, ones that show up on, you know, with people's fears and like. I think
it's like gods, right? The base level, the entities that you're most likely to encounter, most people like to encounter are the lowest of the low, the scum of the ether, right? Now, but it's like the same thing with gods. The really good ones, the really powerful ones, they're hard to access because they exist in a level of consciousness beyond what we're capable of experiencing. But because we have fears through our nervous system, the scumbag ones at the bottom of the lower level of the ether, they can sort of like jump in on that. So
yeah, it's like you have to earn it, right? Like you have to earn it if you're going to come into contact with some of these ones that aren't pathological.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and it's sort of like, sorry, go ahead.
No, I mean, I had this experience with what I perceived to be Lucifer, and it was just a blinding light that filled the room. But I mean, something told me inside that I'm in the presence of Lucifer. And I don't know what that was, but it was incredibly friendly, incredibly kind, and not kind, but incredibly refreshing. I know it's a weird word to say, a weird term to put it, but it felt like I was being refreshed. And spiritual.
You had done something right. You had put in the right amount of work at some point.
Yeah, and I didn't summon it or anything. I mean, deliberately. It happened very unexpectedly after quite an intense day. But yeah, I mean,
well, you have to. I sometimes wonder too if these beings that aren't pathological and the ones that we're talking about, they must have some sort of no contact rule as well with them, and they look down or whatever, and just say.
We also have to.
There's some fuckers I don't want anything to do with.
Exactly. I was just going to say that it could be a situation that we're dangerous to some of them, just like a bacteria or a virus is dangerous to us. There's quite a possibility that we could be dangerous to some of them, and they're disinfecting themselves from us.
Right. So so we all have developed a sort of filter, like who do we let in, who do we and there's inner circle, outer circle, whatever. And only certain types, get through those different boundaries. And I would only imagine it would only make sense that those types of entities would have the same thing. Not every motherfucker gets to talk to whoever it is, but yeah, go ahead. Come into contact with all the pieces of shit. Go on.
I'll tell you something else. I'm coming more and more around to the idea that there's some kind of, I know we're going off topic here, but maybe not really. Some kind of evil invasion going on where people are actually being possessed. I mean, I can see that so much now. And I know it's very easy to say that as an excuse, but people have changed so much, like normal, average day, everyday people. And I was watching that Amber Heard thing, and that thing is not human. That thing, there's something else in there. And there's lots of people like that, You when the camera switches between Johnny Depp and her, you go human, demon, human, demon, demon, human. It's like that, and everyone else in the court is just like a schlub, but she's different. She exudes quite a toxic. She's almost like a vacuum in there, a vacuum of consciousness.
Yeah, and you can see it every now and then, sort of break character and look around the courtroom and see who's watching.
Yep, like a snake.
Yep. The smirks and all that stuff. But no, you can see it every now and then break character and just take notice of who's watching the performance.
And you see that all the time with politicians.
Mm-hmm.
Going to what you're saying, Thomas, about some sort of invasion type of thing is what I was getting at, is that I think a lot of times people tend to put these entities into two groups, either the lower or that they're higher. And I was trying to say something to the extent of saying that I think there are other entities out there that aren't gods or demons, but there are other intelligences out there that, like y'all were just saying, the idea that we might be dangerous to them, or we just might have something that they want. whether that's the space itself, the universe itself is what I'm thinking. I think that literally they can't create their own, or it's easier to take somebody else's creation. Just like in the art of war, is it better to go and take by force, or is it better to go and take something that already exists?
I go along with the Lovecraftian concept that it's just the universe doing its thing. And it's a cosmic horror thing. They're predators and higher beings, but it's not necessarily evil or demonic or in that kind of sense. It just is what the universe is providing us with.
Yeah, the big fish eat the little fish, and there's this tendency to make them into gods, or there's a tendency to make them into lower. Where I think there are just other life forces out there that if the mouth can fit over it, it's going to eat it. And if there's a bigger, so to speak, I'm just saying bigger, if there's a bigger life force out there than us, it can consume us. Not saying that it's a god, or not saying that we're somehow beholden to it, or that it's greater or lesser than us, but maybe in size, or maybe just an ability. Maybe.
Joshua Brell posted a meme that Christian shared. It was kind of funny, but it kind of put the willies up me too, because it was kind of something I thought about. It was like people praying all their lives to God, and when they go to heaven, they discovered Yahweh is a demon. And as it's eating them, they're all screaming, we should have been pagans, or God is a demon. Now, I had that feeling. Like people says on their deathbed, they say people come to bring them somewhere. I often wonder what would happen if you didn't go with them, and who are they, and where are you bringing them? It sounds kind of groomery and abductee, doesn't it? Doesn't it there's people here for me. They want me to go with them. I'm like, well, where are you actually going? No one ever asked that question.
That's what I think a lot of Gnostic technology has been poorly interpreted as the idea of trying to escape this reality, when really in the end, I think a lot of it has to do with when you do leave your body at the end of bodily death, not going into the light, so to speak. You're going along with whatever trope of angels and, whatever shows up, whatever one's psyche projects out there, I think is what they do. I think there's a lot of people who will agree with this, that whatever your archetypal belief system is that you had in your incarnation, that's going to be what plays on a loop once the body drops. And there's going to be some, whether it's St. Peter or Pleiadians or something, that's going to come and take you away at the end. Or nothing. Some, to somebody, it might be a big hard drive or something, that
I really like that expression you use, Gnostic technology. Gnostic technology would be things like AI headsets. You're escaping the planet. Another Gnostic technology, remember those idiots that thought you were all going to go to that Mars One thing, where you're all going to go to Mars, live there and die. There was a one-way trip. That's classic. That would be classic Gnostic technology when you think about it. Anything to escape this planet.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying. I think some of it got poorly misinterpreted, or deliberately misinterpreted by the Jesuits or whomever to make it into that, rather than what I'm saying is that originally the intention might have been about escaping the thing that takes you away at the end, whether it's a group of entities or some kind of trap, some kind of spiritual trap that we, like some kind of magnetic thing between two poles that can pull the human being out of the body. And,
I tell you when my times comes, I'm not going to do it.
Right. That's what I'm trying to say. That maybe we should all not go along with whatever's pulling us into the light.
You could be being brought into it like a cosmic monster's mouth as your soul is fluid.
Right. Something like that. And that I think is what the original Telesti, or whatever we want to call them, that the Gnostic stuff came from, was trying to get at. But the Bible people and all them who, the Jesuits and whatever, have taken it and misinterpreted it into, a good versus evil thing, that kind of thing. And we have, the modern, we can go on and Google Gnostic beliefs and have what it is now, just like what they do with everything. They take any spiritual practice, any magic, and turn it into that. They take it all and turn it into the same thing, whether it's Freemasonry, whether it's Christianity, whether it's anything. It all ends up coming to that same path. And I think that's what a lot of Gnostic stuff is now. But originally, all these people were aware that there's some way out of the loop, some way out of that dying and going into getting consumed by whatever the Leviathan is on the other side, that there is a way to not do that and to go do what thou wilt throughout the universe.
telling a spirit or whatever it is to go to the light is so annoying to me. It's like screaming at somebody to go to the bathroom. Go to the bathroom. Go to the bathroom. Fuck you. I don't have to go. Like, no, I'm not. It seems so stupid. All right.
1 hour in already.
Okay. Bizarre and horrifying cases of mass hysteria throughout history. Mass hysteria is a term used to describe the situation in which physical or psychological symptoms appear en masse, spreading rapidly throughout communities and occasionally across whole cities and countries. During an outbreak, afflicted individuals may experience uncontrollable laughter, fainting, fits, dizziness, muscle weakness, or any number of other symptoms that do not appear to have any physical cause. Cases of hysteria have been reported all over the world for centuries and provide a fascinating insight into the complex nature of human psychology. The term hysteria derives from the Greek word hysteria, meaning uterus, and is generally attributed to the ancient Greek physician Hippocrates. However, the association with the uterus goes all the way back to the ancient Egyptian Kahun papyrus, which identifies the cause of hysterical disorders as being the spontaneous movement of the uterus to various locations within the female body. By the Middle Ages, this was replaced by a belief in witchcraft, demonic possession, or insanity as the cause. While occurrences of mass hysteria continue to confound the medical community, it is now generally believed to be linked to extreme cases of emotional or mental stress. Here's a look at some famous and bizarre cases of mass hysteria in history. The medieval dance mania, 13th through the 17th century. Dance mania, otherwise known as the dancing plague, St. John's dance, or the dance of St. Vitus, gripped mainland Europe between 13th and the 17th centuries. One of the most well-known major outbreaks took place in Germany on June 24th, 1374. During this occurrence, afflicted individuals would dance hysterically through the streets for hours, days, and apparently even months until they collapsed due to exhaustion or died from heart attack or stroke. The number of participants at any one outbreak could reach into the thousands. The dancing plague is known to have occurred numerous times throughout medieval Europe, with outbreaks occurring in Italy, Luxembourg, France, Germany, Holland, and Switzerland. It was initially considered that the dancing mania was a curse sent by a saint, commonly thought to be St. John the Baptist or St. Vitus. Hence, the alternative names for the condition. People suffering from this condition would therefore proceed to places dedicated to the said saint in order to pray for deliverance from the affliction, a remedy that apparently restored many to full health. The biting nuns, 15th century. In the 15th century, another outbreak of mass hysteria occurred in Germany when a nun in a convent started biting other sisters. Before long, the behavior spread throughout the convent, and as news spread further afield, so too did the phenomenon, resulting in biting outbreaks in convents across Germany, the Netherlands, and Italy. As described by a 15th century doctor, a nun in a German nunnery fell to biting all of her companions. In the course of a short time, all the nuns of this convent began biting each other. The news of this infatuation among the nuns soon spread and now passed convent to convent through a great part of Germany, principally Saxony, and it afterwards visited the nunneries of Holland, and at last the nuns had biting mania even as far as Rome. The church believed the nuns had become possessed and attempted to perform exorcisms, but this failed to stop the behavior. Finally, they resorted to threats of flogging or being dunked in water for any nun caught biting another. After a few examples of nuns being punished, the behavior quickly subsided. The Salem witch trials. Let's see. Instances involving the propagation of mass hysteria might seem at odds with an increasingly educated general public. Why no longer relying on wandering wombs, demonic possessions, and witchcraft as an explanation? But episodes of mass hysteria continue to occur. One recent one took place in 2012 when 1,900 children across 15 schools in Sri Lanka were treated for a range of symptoms, including skin rashes, vertigo, and coughing, which had no obvious physical cause. While cases of hysteria are easy to laugh off as ridiculous and bizarre behavior, research has shown that there are a number of complex factors that can contribute to the formation and spread of collective hysteria, including social anxieties, cultural pressures, rumors, fears, and extraordinary excitement, religious beliefs, reinforcing of actions by authority figures, and extreme stress. Social, political, and religious contexts have changed over the centuries, but the human psychology has largely remained the same, and it is for this reason we are likely to see many more occasions of mass hysteria into the future. Boys have a heyday.
Well, there was another one that they missed out in Israel in the 1950s. There was a mass hysterical outbreak among girls laughing. And the Israeli government took it so seriously because they thought maybe it might be a sign, a portent, or some kind of psychic weather event of a possible, invasion from a hostile neighbor. So that was never really ever understood. I just find it interesting that although it always seems to start with women, it does spread to men after it takes off. Now, I looked into this over the years, and I think it might have to do with sexual frustration. I know that sounds very cheap and Freudian, but it seems to happen in societies where sexual activity is really badly looked upon or considered really sinful. So, and then it also seems to happen in convents. Well, what does that tell you? Now, and it is called hysteria for a reason, because it's to do with the female sexual organs and stuff like that. So maybe the Greeks discovered earlier on that, it could be something like that. I know that sounds kind of cheap and Freudian or something, but you can't ignore the fact that it's all tends to be young women or nuns. So there's something to that, and it does spread to men eventually. Those dancing plagues they had in Europe, you wonder if the men were frustrated gay men. You just wonder in a time when you couldn't be gay. So it's an interesting one. I don't know what to make of it. I don't have any theories on it, except I kind of agree with the mainstream theories about it, that it could be, or what the original Greeks said about it, that it could be about lack of activity in the female sexual organs, leading to a kind of a frustration mania among young women or having lost their virginity or something. I don't know. But it's, I don't know. St. Vitus Dance is a really good song by Black Sabbath. That's all I know.
To go along with that, to take it a step deeper, mention about an invasion. I wonder if tying this into the last story, if the hysteria is a result because the fact that female energy is receiving, if you think of male energy, being an outward force and female energy being an inward receptive force, women are incredibly more psychically perceptive and psychically aware than men tend to be. So
and gay men.
So
yeah,
I guess anybody who's receiving, well, I guess it is really that down and dirty and that black and white, that if you are a giver, so maybe, anyway, I'm not going to go to that extent, but receptive energy like that would be more aware of outside forces. And like you were saying, like a psychic weather thing, Thomas, if there were some kind of lower astral or some kind of pathological spiritual force that were around, perhaps those women, the nuns and all the ones who don't have a healthy sex relationship with themselves or with others, would be easier to throw off center. A healthy woman, probably has a very good psychic center and can't be thrown off. But if someone who's repressed sexually, they can get thrown off really easily. So if there is some kind of spiritual pathological force around a receptive being, whether it's a woman or a man, that person might start, as we'd say, Renfielding. The canaries the canaries in the coal mine that we keep track of on Facebook and everything. Once the Renfielding starts going, we start seeing the same people start to do their hysterical dance. So perhaps it does have something. Yeah, perhaps it does have something to do with that receptive energy, where women just have a better intuition about things like that in general. Healthy women do. It's just like they can perceive things that us men just aren't aware of. We know that as a concept, and we're very good at it as a mental concept or as a spiritual concept, but we don't perceive it as easily as a woman can take, perceive the slightest shift in the direction of the wind, the psychic wind that they're masters of this. So I would imagine women who are incredibly psychic and have that kind of ability to be a medium in that way if they're also natively kind of hysterical or borderline or something like that, they're going to be the ones who, that little breeze, psychic breeze is going to send them spiraling out. And then we see that on social media. We see that in public. And that might be what this story is talking about, is the women who aren't as grounded, who aren't, solid rocks, being more easily. And then, at the same time, the solid rock women might be making paintings about it, or might be choreographing dance about it, or writing a book about it, or creating something with it, transmuting it into something.
I'd like to hear. Oh, good. I'd like to hear Timothy. Yes, I was going to say that, because we need the ladies to chime in. Because we don't understand this stuff, so we need help. We're stupid and we need help. So women do have greater intuition. So what do you think is the reason for this?
I don't think you guys are stupid by any means. I think we're just different. And but there is a difference. And I think that difference should be respected. Women, yes, we do feel things differently. And, coming up in a society that, for everybody, not just women, but for everybody across the board says, you shouldn't listen to your intuition. That's bullshit. We rely on facts and empirical evidence and all that. So, whatever your gut instinct tells you, that's stupid and don't listen to that. But I can't tell you how many times my gut feeling has led me in the wrong direction. And when I haven't listened to it, I've been fucked over, and that's only my fault. And I wish that I could impart something really great. I wish I knew the perfect thing to say to allow others, men, women, whoever. I think anybody can struggle with this. I wish I knew the perfect thing to say to allow somebody to listen to that feeling. And sometimes it does feel histrionic. Sometimes you do feel fucking insane and not sure of yourself. And that, there's no way that could be true, because it's so off center. It so doesn't fit with the narrative of what's going on. But those are the most important times to listen to that thing.
I know, I've known a few women who had fibroids, and some of them suffered terribly. And every last one of them told me it was when they repressed feelings that they didn't let out. And that's kind of a similar thing. And a lot of that would have been like intuition as well, that they were ignoring their good feeling, and this kind of thing grew inside them.
Yeah. And it's, before it, God forbid it ever gets to that point. And I'm sorry for, anybody that it has gotten to that point. They've been so repressed or repress themselves. It does before it physically manifests. Thank God I don't have any issues like that, but I know what it feels like when I've repressed that stuff within myself. And it does feel like stones in your body. It feels heavy. It feels physically unfit. It doesn't feel right. And, kind of traveling that feeling up through your body, up until, it gets to the point where you may have a spoken word about something. Things get caught in your throat and you can't express yourself, or things come out wrong, or just maybe you do end up, because that energy has to go somewhere, you may just end up expressing irrational anger, or uncontrollable sadness or something like that, and it's and that's where the whole histrionic thing comes from, women being hysterical. And yeah, some of the time for sure. I've been a fucking mess before, and I've gotten angry unprovoked and things like that. But, if we're keeping it strictly within the spiritual sense, when you keep those things repressed, and I think that this would probably apply to men as well. I don't have a prostate, but things like prostate cancer or stomach cancer or throat cancer or ED or something like that. All of that stuff becomes manifested when we repress those feelings that should be coming to us so naturally that we deny.
Yeah, I think
and it's a travesty.
I think this topic is one that's still, we're in the air. It's never been properly researched ever or anything. And I think it's like one that, you think it should be really properly researched, but it hasn't been. But it's still one for the
And they never will. Honestly, they'll never research it in the way that we're going to talk about it now. They just won't. But for anybody out there who may be dealing with some of these medical issues, if you can, maybe take yourself aside a bit and, kind of try and unpack some of, where do you have repressed anger or things that you needed to say to somebody. Maybe you don't have the opportunity to say the things that you needed to say.
I think that's why a lot of girls these days join boxing clubs.
Yeah.
Boxing and martial arts, but especially boxing has been popular with a lot of women in recent years. I know loads of women in boxing clubs. And so that seems to be something like that. That kind of outlet seems to help.
Yeah, I'm going to go on my little rant here for a second because you gave me an in. I started jujitsu about 6 weeks ago, and I never have ever in my life had a pull towards martial arts. I always preferred, weightlifting or yoga or things like that. And, I went through sort of an episode and an emotional thing, and I just needed something that I'd never, ever done before. And what I've gotten out of my experience with jujitsu is, yes, I love the physical aspect of it. It's one of the hardest physical workouts I've ever done. And I like that type of thing. But what I love about it even more than that is I try and go 4 to 5 times a week. Sometimes it doesn't always work out. But my favorite thing about it is that is the 1 hour in my life or in that day in my life that I don't think about any of the other bullshit in my life. It is strictly about, how am I moving my body? How am I using my mind? Like, what am I doing to be able to preserve myself and not even about winning. I'm going to lose for the next 2 years and that's fine. I don't even care about winning. But there's some sort of psychic release that I didn't notice that I had a lot of repressed anger and anguish and things that for people that I'll never be able to talk to them about it. I won't, because some of these people I have no contact with ever again. And I've done that on purpose, but that doesn't undo some of the duress that I've had because of some of these engagements with certain types of people, and that tension is still in there. So I get to, and I'm not working that out on people. I'm working it out within myself through learning how to use my body and use my mind at the same time. And it's hard. It's the hardest fucking thing I've ever done. And you sweat and you get humbled and you get fucked up and like I'm covered in bruises head to toe, but I'm proud of that. I'm proud of it. I come out of that with bruises and I'm like, look, I fucking earned this because I fought and I fought really hard. And so there is a thing, every class that I go to, I survive a little bit longer, even if it's just a second or two. I survive a little bit longer. And there's something to that. And I'm not saying everybody needs to go out and do jujitsu or do a martial art, but I'm just saying for me that's really helped because I did realize that I had a lot of that shit that was tied up in things like that I hadn't been able to work out yet. And so I've been able to kind of find a way out of it through that for myself personally. That's been great. So I highly advocate for it.
Well done, you. Well done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And it's like, that's what I mean about, I think what we're all talking about is there are women who are grounded and who have a place to put it in, to take that psychic energy and transmute it. And then there are ones who don't. People, not just women. There are people who.
I was just going to say to you, fucking stepped on a landmine then. You stepped on it and you said there are some women who are grounded. I was like, oh, we said deep shit.
Yeah, whatever. Yeah. So there are some So there are some women who are grounded and there are other women who aren't. And there are some gay men, there are some men, whatever, straight, gay, transsexual, whatever. But the whole point is that there are some people who are grounded and who have a place to put it into. And there are people who aren't. And the ones that don't have jujitsu or painting or karate or whatever to put it into, it's like a steam check valve. And if you have a check valve that's jujitsu, that steam can escape out through that. Otherwise, if there is no psychic check valve there, the whole fucking boiler blows up, right? That's my point.
Can I just say, because I'm older than you guys, I just want to say to Timothy, a lot of that stuff vanishes as you age, that kind of like anxiety. I don't know why, but for some reason, when you should be enjoying your life when you're younger, you're fucking worried about everything. Yeah, everything is an existential crisis. And I was like that. And that's what drove me to, like, you know, be very ambitious in my career and everything. And that was really like a kind of a fear of, like, I better have enough money so if I get sick, something happens. You worry about everything. But for some reason, I don't know why, but when you get past like your late 40s, that starts to recede and go into the background. It's the weirdest shit. It's the weirdest shit, but it does. It's like, why can't that happen when you're old instead of fucking up your life when you're young? And I had to think about that when I was, Jesus, I spent like most of my 20s like lying in bed at night, even though things were going quite okay, no major problems, worrying about. It was like that famous scene in the Woody Allen film Manhattan, where he thinks he has a brain tumor because he has a pain in his head, and he goes to the CAT scan, and he finds that he doesn't have a brain tumor, and he runs outside dancing, and he does music playing, and then he stops for a second and goes, "Oh my God, I'm going to die one day." It's like that, you know. But that it does recede after your mid to late 40s. I don't know why, but it does. I'm
really glad to hear that. That is some really great news. I haven't had really great news in a while.
Because I had that anxiety thing too, and it is shit. I know exactly what you feel like. It's shit.
Yeah, it is. And sometimes, you know, it prevents you from sleeping well or from waking up or getting out of bed. But I just know that for me, and I'm a physical type person, you know, I benefit well from hard, intense physical activities. And
that's the answer to it, even if it's mental, is a distraction, because your mind can be your worst fucking enemy.
It can be.
When it runs away with itself. Yeah. And it's like, it's like really can, but that seems to be an affliction of younger people. I don't know why. It's stupid, but it is. I mean, there used to be times I used to think I wish I was an airhead or an NPC or something like that. But
I think maybe it has to do with, you know, when you're in your younger years, that would be the time in which most people would be a student, right? So you're sitting down for many, many hours of the day, and it's a mental fucking barrage. Just it's nonstop. You know, you have to think about things, you have to write them, you have to read them. And there's just not much opportunity for intense physical exertion to sort of like work out those tensions. And then, you know, add on top of that, whatever, you know, specific individual turmoils might be happening. You know, some people have it very easy. Some people have it very rough. It just depends.
Well, I'll tell you something, Timothy. None of my worst fears ever came true.
Never. They never do.
Never. And nearly all of my dreams came true. So
that's right.
Take it from that.
That's right. And I'm very glad that you said that. It would have taken me a while to get to that point, but you did it. You said it. But yeah, I guess, and just this will be the last thing I have to say about that. But just going super hardcore into some sort of physical activity that you've never done before, it takes you out of your anxiety, and it puts you in the moment, and you have nothing else to think about other than what's happening to you in the moment. And then the endorphins kick in, and you get all of those good brain chemicals that are there for a reason. You know, we've evolved to have these things happen to us, you know, have these chemicals in our brain for a reason.
It's like,
and take full advantage of them.
In the Bhagavad Gita, it says something like consciousness is the imperative of action into the manifest, which creates God consciousness. So you have to actually do it. You have to have action.
Yeah.
But the sort of like the interface between consciousness and God consciousness is putting action into the manifest.
Yeah. And you will be shocked at the other areas in your life to which you find you have endurance that you did not have before.
Yep.
And there's been several times where I've had, 200 plus pound of man like laying on my face. And I just say to myself, fight, Arjuna, fight. And I remember that whole mythology, and like, that doesn't mean that I win, but I don't quit.
You have no choice. You have no choice. Yeah.
No choice. It's survival. It's survival, and it doesn't matter if you win or if you lose. It's how you handle the dilemma.
Yeah. See, that's the difference between Vedic philosophy and Buddhist philosophy. Buddhist philosophy believes that you do nothing and you achieve a state of Zen, which is, I think, is a lot of bollocks, actually. And the Vedic philosophy, which originally where it came from, is a belief that you attain godhood by action, by doing things, and and consciously doing them, and knowing they have to be done. And that to me is the real shit, no doubt about it.
It is, and remembering to breathe. And no matter what situation you're in, whether you have 200+ pound of man fucking laying on top of you, or whether you're just in a very stressful situation at work or a fight with some, just remembering to breathe. So much tension gets held up, and then, your mind stops working. So just remembering to breathe is such a big deal. You find your way out.
And then you don't have St. Vitus dance.
That's right.
Yeah, what you said, Thomas, about Buddhism, it's like almost like that's the Eastern version of Christianity, the Eastern version of turning the other cheek.
Oh, it is, with the golden statues and everything. It's the Catholicism of the East.
Yeah.
Oh, one of the most explosive NPC rages normie rages I ever encountered in my life was when I mentioned to some Egypt that they were going on about, I'm Buddhist, and blah, 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 blah. And I was like, Buddhism is the Catholicism of the East, and they went absolutely psychotic because they didn't want to, it's just golden statues and all this stuff, and the same sexual abuse of young boys happens massively. And now I know that's not to say all Buddhism is like that, of course not. There's lots of good people involved in it as well. But I mean, it seems to be afflicted by a lot of the same problems that Christianity is afflicted by.
Right.
Stay pagan, become a pagan, or become a Hindu. Get away from all that shit.
That's right. Okay. Dreams are gateways leading into alternative realities coexisting with our own. Although it hasn't been proven yet, the multiverse theory remains a mathematically possible formula according to which various other universes exist. Inside these parallel dimensions, we live as projections of our own existence, and we may access these places during dreams. Even if you find yourself in one of these realities, you make decisions which show up in dreams, making us wonder about their meaning. And why do people dream of future events? Are these paths leading to another universe or a different reality? For the ancient Greeks and Romans, dreams were considered divine messages. In antiquity, the Chinese interpreted dreams as a door to the underworld, and Native American tribes and Mesoamericans had no doubt about dreams originating from a world they visited while their physical bodies were resting. In ancient Egypt, those capable of reproducing dreams were shown respect and recognition because they were believed to possess otherworldly powers. Today, dreams are seen as projections of recent or past events, or due to a deep emotional state which impacted our subconscious. Sometimes we experience vivid dreams, and on other occasions, sounds can be perceived, usually familiar sounds. Courtesy to new and advanced technologies, scientists are now able to gather images compiling scans of our brains during sleep to unravel the science behind the eerie dreaming experience. Similar to metaphysics, the theory of parallel universes cannot be probed, at least not yet. Besides the theoretical concepts revolving around Earth's spherical form, invisible electromagnetic fields, the quantum world, black holes, and bent space, the multiverse theory also made it to the list. The fundamental problem of cosmology is that the laws of physics as we know them break down at an instant of the Big Bang. Well, some people say, what's wrong with that? What's wrong with having the laws of physics collapse? Well, for a physicist, this is a disaster, said American theoretical physicist, futurist, and popularizer of science, Dr. Michio Kaku. All our lives, we've decided to the proposition that the universe obeys noble laws that can be written down in the language of mathematics, and here we have the centerpiece of the universe itself, a missing piece beyond physical law. People often dream about a place that they haven't visited or seen before, which could mean that such visions are due to what we have experienced in a parallel universe. Other dreams of future events may come true, although we may not always remember them prior to such. Visions may be insights from a world where we're experiencing different versions of reality. Who knows? Maybe those dreams with a greater impact on ourselves are truly pathways leading into parallel worlds. This, of course, is pure speculation, but without stretching our imagination and intuition, we'll never be able to learn more about the metaphysic consequences of the universe and this reality inside of which we all dwell. So I remember you posted, Thomas, a couple days ago or yesterday, maybe, something about a dream that you had about going into a different realm. Was that right?
Well, kind of. It was, I don't want to get too personal about it, but it was the most powerful dream I've had in years. And it was the most visually intense film I've had in dream I've had in many years. And it was a beautiful, it went through the whole thing. It was quite frightening. And then there was like a sense of anxiety. And then it was almost like a blessing at the end that happened. And it was quite a remarkable dream. It was like Technicolor. It would make a phenomenal movie if it was ever made to a movie. But it was basically the end of the world, but the end of the world didn't happen. And the dream basically said that certain people were favored, and without sounding narcissistic, that I was one of them. And so it was like that. And I woke up feeling like completely different about so many things. But it was the most powerful dream I've had in years. And I don't fully understand it. I don't know if it was wishful thinking or anything, or if it was like my ego running away at myself. But I felt like I was getting sort of like the grace of the gods or something like that from it. I was being reminded, no, you're okay. You're being looked after, that kind of thing. And so something that had been bothering me that I don't want to talk about in the background ceased to be a complete issue after that, and it never happened because of it. So it was almost like when the dream told me to switch off. But now on the other part of the thing, I believe dreams are multifaceted. I think some of them are like visions of the future. And I also think that some of them are another side of us in a different reality. I think when we go to sleep and go into REM sleep, we actually are still here. We're still around, but we're off somewhere else. And that's why I think you go into different dimensions. I really do believe that. I think it's the most common thing. The most common, perhaps it's something like pre-REM sleep. You have dreams that are prophetic or helpful. REM sleep, you are in another reality. And there were groups called the Somnambulants. They were in a French group who used to actually actively dream. And they would try to stay awake and take notes on the point of falling asleep. And I've actually fallen asleep with people, and they were talking to me. And I've continued the conversation that I had in the other reality with them on this reality. And it's the most bizarre. And I'll say, well, yeah, but we could try something else. The door is the wrong color. And they go, what are you talking about? We're in the middle. We're dealing with something else. So that makes me absolutely believe that it's a mixture of, it's prophetic, it's inspirational, but it's also at some point another version of you in a different world.
Right. And I think with that, Thomas, like you can say that the other reality that we're going into could also be potentials of what we are truly capable of creating. And sometimes we need to work it out there before we can bring it out in here. I know that I've dealt with that with projects before, where it's like a piece of music I'm working on, for instance, little bits of it will get worked out in there. And then I try to remember as much of it as I can once I'm conscious again in the body. But it's almost like a way of trying something on and processing things outside of linear time. Because once we're in the body, it's like linear time is very much a consideration. But in a world outside of the body, linear time can kind of take a step back, and 5 years can happen in 15 minutes in a dreamscape, and we can process things like you're saying. If there's certain things that we don't want to talk about right now, but we can process them while we're in a dream state. We can do tremendous things there. We've got more access to our unconscious than we do, in the body, where there are considerations in the body that we can't escape while we're in a sober human body. Sober being the key.
Yeah. We're getting very philosophical tonight, I must say.
It's a good time. We all needed it. It is. I think now is the time for the best part of the show, the psychic weather. Thomas, if you're ready.
Yep.
Is it bad? Is it great? Are you happy? Are you irate? The weekend psychic weather.
Well, the psychic weather this week is there is none. Nothing is happening. It's completely still. I've noticed no mega trends and no behaviors that are representing anything I can put a pattern towards. It's like we're in that part of the ocean where the low pressure front and the high pressure fronts are so far apart that there's complete stillness. So perhaps that's why we're having this kind of show here tonight, a little bit kind of far-sidey talky. And there is no psychic weather this week. So relax. There's nothing to be worried about, nothing to be positive about. It's just there is none. The wind is not blowing. The rain is not falling, and it's just nice and peaceful. So the psychic weather this week is there is none.
Is it bad? Is it great? Are you happy? Are you irate? The weekend psychic weather.
We are at the age where no news is good news, right?
Exactly. Yeah. It's just like it happens in the regular weather, it happens in the psychic weather too. Sometimes it's inert. There's nothing, there's nothing particularly to be concerned about or think about. Yeah.
Yeah. And there has to be lulls, right? Like there cannot always be a very extreme one way or the other. Like there has to be that middle point sometimes.
Yeah, definitely.
Otherwise, sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm agreeing. Definitely. You're right. That's it. That's it. You hit the nail on the head. There has to be, we're kind of like we're halfway down a sine wave, but we're kind of like going down it slowly or going up it slowly.
Yeah. Without any contrast, it doesn't mean anything.
Yeah. Yeah.
We've gotten a few more angry faces, so I'm not sure who's feeling triggered right now, but
I was up on it's funny. I went to see the megaliths at Loch Crew there the other day, and that's how it felt up on top of the mountain. Even though it was a beautiful sunny day and the wind was blowing and there was just gorgeous views and everything, I felt this kind of sense of like just complete balance. I wasn't being blown away by it. I wasn't being disappointed by it. It was just like it was what it was, kind of thing.
And I think, and maybe I'm speaking for myself right now, but I think that state of equilibrium is something that most of us just are not used to. So there's that self-sabotage thing, right? Like when things are too good to be true, we have to find a way to fuck it up. So it's a real important lesson with the psychic weather this week, even though you said there's nothing. It's actually, there's more than maybe most other psychic weathers of learning how to be okay without chaos and without, the sails being whipped around.
Yeah.
And just how to be okay, to be in balance when there's not much happening.
Contemplative. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was literally just about to say something about that with the contemplative part with this. People are saying it's a very philosophical show today. And it's like if we're using the nautical analogy, the seas are good, the sky is clear, and we're out fishing. We're literally going down in the depths and seeing what we pull up right now. So it's like we're going into a very contemplative philosophical place because we've got a moment to sit back, cast the lines out, and see what comes up from the bottom. And we're not catching any sea monsters or anything. Oh, okay. I'll get you the right link. Yeah. But yeah, I think we're kind of psychic fishing right now in a good way. And little angry faces coming up every time there happens to be a flood of emojis come up. That's funny that people keep putting those in there.
Okay, so here we go. Lake Sultana, a place where gravity does not work. There are many amazing places on Earth, the secrets of which have not been unraveled by man. The abnormal processes taking place there are not amenable to the laws of logic and physics. There is one anomalous zone in Argentina, Lake Sultana, where gravity simply turns off from time to time. Unfortunately, this phenomenon is rare and chaotic. When the force of gravity is turned off, people are thrown into the air for several meters, regardless of where they were at the time in the water or on the beach. Caught up by an unknown force, people soar above the ground to a height of up to 3 meters. If they do not move, then they can hold out for about 30 to 40 minutes. At the slightest movement, weightlessness disappears. Scientists have not yet been able to find a logical explanation for this phenomenon. The activity of the anomalous zone defies any logic. The duration of this anomalous phenomenon ranges from a few seconds to half an hour. Sometimes, in order to wait for the disconnection of gravity, people wait for several weeks on the shore. Sometimes gravity stops working several times a day. There are still no official studies on the lake, and scientists cannot give an exact answer to the question of why the loss of gravity occurs. One of the few researchers, physicist Carlos Peñas, constantly monitors a zone of gravitational anomalies and claims that the devices always work without a glitch. Nothing portends a disconnection of physical strength. Some daredevils conduct experiments on the lake independently. Those who manage to get rid of gravity argue that it is very scary and looks like swimming under the water. At the same time gravity turns on, it is also very smooth, so the landings turn out to be successful. Since 1997, local residents and tourists have noticed the appearance of rounded flying objects on the lake and nearby. As a rule, they glowed bright yellow and flew out from under the water, or on the contrary, hit it. There are many pictures of these UFOs in Argentinian magazines and media. Some researchers directly connect the appearance of the phenomenon of weightlessness with the activity of unknown creatures at the bottom of the lake. Agree, there is a spontaneous change in gravity. You involuntarily begin to believe in fantastic versions. Carlos Peñas shared his feelings from several cases of experienced weightlessness. The first time I was scared and didn't understand anything. I was lifted 1.5 meters above the water, and I began to wave my arms and scream. The impact ended quickly. The second time, I witnessed how a guy and a girl bathing in the lake were lifted into the air. After that, I began to spend a lot of time observing the lake. Over 20 years, I have collected more than 100 evidence of visits to Salentina by unidentified flying and floating objects. It seems to me that these two phenomena are related. No matter how much I communicate with physicists, no one could give a clear explanation. Therefore, one has to turn the realm of hypothesis, which many consider unscientific. I managed to repeatedly see UFOs and levitating people with my own eyes. Moreover, I felt it myself. How to describe the feeling? You seem to be in the water, only in the air, and then you can breathe. The main thing is to not move, otherwise the impact on you will stop. What to say? The phenomenon has been studied by academic scientists for several years, but so far has not been possible to explain it. Who knows what can cause local levitation over the lake?
We don't get enough stories out of South America like this. And I was talking to a lovely chap the other day who lives here from Argentina, and he came to Ireland to, well, he lives in Ireland, but he's mad for the megaliths, so he goes around the megaliths, looking at the megaliths here. And I asked him if there's anything like that in Argentina, and he said, "Oh, well, no." And then he said, "I found that there was." So it's weird. It's like it's a weird synchronicity this week. Also, I saw a river that flowed upstream. I saw this week. I went to see a river that's famous for flowing upstream, uphill. And I thought that it was just going to be the lay of the land and kind of like an optical illusion that it was actually really going downhill. But the way the land was laid, it was going uphill. But no, the actual river was flowing uphill, as clear as anything. It was flowing uphill. So that lake sounds like this river, that there's a certain place around the world where kind of reality goes, and takes a kind of a kind of curveball and throws it at you. And that's what this lake in Argentina sounds like. But again, it's weird. I'm having these synchronicities this week. I met a guy from Argentina that was into all this stuff, and then I see a river that flows uphill on the same day. And now this story on the show is like mad. But go ahead. There are 40 hotspots in certain places around the world. And that sounds like one, like Mount Shasta in America.
Mm-hmm. Reminds me a little bit of Gravity Hills. Do you guys have any of those over there in that part of the world?
Yeah, there's a famous one in Northern Ireland where you take a handbrake off and the car rolls uphill. And it's quite a pronounced incline too. It's not even like a guesstimate if this thing is absolutely definitely going uphill.
Right. Yeah, and what is that? It's like there's one close to where I grew up in Santa Paula, California, near Ventura. And it just makes me wonder if there's some sort of like standing wave of energy there still from something Atlantean or something from a previous iteration of civilization that has left a standing wave of energy that affects gravitation. And I've heard things like this before about with gravity in particular and magnetism affecting consciousness, affecting awareness, and that you can, when like MK Ultra kind of stuff where they're able to implant ideas into people's minds a little more easily with tremendous amounts of either excessive gravity or excessive magnetism, being able to, like the Philadelphia experiment, right? They're producing a tremendous amount of DC electromagnetic interference. Is that what it was, or was it AC? One way or the other, they're producing a tremendous amount of electromagnetic interference into those sailors' minds on the ship in the Philadelphia experiment, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then same thing with gravity, like that can, when, there are airmen or sailors, Marines that are doing aviation training and they go into those, into G-force simulators and stuff. It's almost like you can knock someone out of their body when they experience, I think, like 3Gs plus, like you can render someone exterior out of their body and they just totally black out, but they're still awake. They're just outside of their body. They're 3 feet behind their head.
Yeah, and they see aliens and everything. They see other beings. It's really weird.
Yeah. It's like the body goes to sleep, but they're still awake, And it's that thing, again, lower astral. As soon as you pop out of body, as soon as you pop out of normal everyday waking awareness, there's other things there. And a lot of times around the surface, there could be pathological entities there, but there can also be just other things, other spiritual wildlife, as I like to use that term. Yeah.
And the thing that with the river flowing upstream and all this stuff, and the roads where the cars go uphill, and they're localized gravitational phenomena, but they don't seem to affect humans. But they do make you wonder, is that how things like the Indian rope trick is done to defy gravity? They call it the Indian rope trick, where a guy throws a rope up in the air and then it catches on to something invisible, and then he crawls up it. He crawls up it. Now, I have never been able to figure out, and I don't think it's ever been fully debunked, how that is actually done. How someone can throw a rope, and it's not a stick he throws up, it's a rope, or a pole, and he runs up the rope, and the rope is dangling below him and loose, and he's hanging off it in midair. So, I mean, there has to be something. I mean, unless I couldn't imagine even how that you could begin to fake something like that. I mean, I've seen the one where people put they sit on a kind of a thing on, and it makes it look like they're floating. But that's not this, it's kind of like under their arm or something like that. It might be a walking stick, but it's a whole contraption to hold them up on it. But this thing, they run up the rope. That has to be, I can't, have these people defied gravity. And there's loads of stories of like these mystics back in the 1800s who used to go to parties with like famous people, and it would float around over their heads in the room. So there has to be something that makes gravity optional.
Yeah, that, consideration being, senior to the physical universe, that the things that we can comprehend in our own mind to make it so in the physical universe, we're able to create reality. And I think there are people out there who have more skill and more talent in that ability. And then there are people who don't believe in themselves, and they'll never be able to do it. There's all the people like we talked about with the in between lives thing. Like there are people that will literally just see nothing when they die because they believe in nothing. They've got no, they don't believe in themselves even. Yeah. They consider themselves to be a bag of meat with, Pavlovian responses triggered into them. And
that's what they'll get.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. But then there are people that do have, these, people have called them cities or siddhis, these things that switch on after doing certain spiritual practices. And I want to say that, there are groups of people that have those cities more than others. And perhaps what you're talking about with the Indian rope trick is actually something that, somebody can mock up that experience and actually climb up a rope. Just like, you've talked about certain stage magicians, the real ones, they're actually doing the real thing. And, the stage gimmick is their day job, but they have legitimate ability.
Yep.
Okay. Most amazing coincidences in world history. Gemini brothers killed in along the same road 2 hours apart. A falling newborn saved 2 times by the same man. Our world is filled with unbelievable occurrences of coincidence and synchronicity that defy explanation. Are these incredible true stories of mere coincidence or maybe the hand of fate? The stories of identical twins living nearly identical lives are often astonishing, but perhaps none more so than those of identical twins born in Ohio. The twin boys were separated at birth, being adopted by different families. Unknown to each other, both families named the boys James. And here the coincidences just begin. Both James grew up not even knowing of the other, yet both sought law enforcement training, both had abilities in mechanical drawing and carpentry, and each had married women named Linda. They both had sons, whom one named James Allen and the other named James Allen. Alan, Allan. The twin brothers also divorced their wives and married other women, both named Betty. And they both owned dogs, which they named Toy. 40 years after their childhood separation, the two men were reunited to share their amazing similar lives. Just like Edgar Allan Poe's book. In the 19th century, the famous horror writer Edgar Allan Poe wrote a book called The Narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym. It was about 4 survivors of a shipwreck who were on an open boat for many days before they decided to kill and eat the cabin boy whose name was Richard Parker. Some years later, in 1884, the All foundered. Okay, sorry, that sentence was written word. Foundered with only 4 survivors who were in an open boat for many days. Eventually, the 3 senior members of the crew killed and ate the cabin boy. The name of the cabin boy was Richard Parker. A falling baby, saved twice by the same man. In Detroit sometime in the 1930s, a young, if incredibly careless, mother had been eternally grateful to a man named Joseph Figlock. As Figlock was walking down the street, the mother's baby fell from a high window onto a figlock. The baby's fall was broken, and both man and baby were unharmed. A stroke of luck on its own, but a year later, the very same baby fell from the very same window onto poor, unsuspecting Joseph Figlock as he was again passing beneath. And again, the boy survived the event. Let's see. A bullet that reached its destiny years later. Henry Zeglin, though he had dodged fate, in 1883, he broke off a relationship with his girlfriend who, out of distress, committed suicide. The girl's brother was so enraged that he hunted down Zeglin and shot him. The brother, believing he had killed Zeglin, then turned his gun on himself and took his own life. But Zeglin had not been killed. The bullet, in fact, had only grazed his face and then lodged in a tree. Zeglin surely thought himself a lucky man. Some years later, however, Zeglin decided to cut down a large tree, which still had the bullet in it. The task seemed so formidable that he decided to blow it up with a few sticks of dynamite. The explosion propelled the bullet into Zeglin's head, killing him. That comes from Ripley's Believe It or Not. Your phone's ringing.
Amazing. That incredible stuff. I also heard a story once of a woman who, when she got married and moved into this new house, and she'd lost her wedding ring in the garden. And 20 years later, when her daughter was getting married, she was pulling carrots out of the garden, and her wedding ring was around the carrot like the car was growing around it. Just incredible stuff like that. I mean, what I find the most amazing about all these stories is the poetry of them. There's a poetic element. They're almost like Shakespearean, in that kind of way. They're not just interesting coincidences, but they've almost as a theatricality about them.
And it's almost like that intention gets carried through poetically, like the guy that meant to kill the other dude, and then eventually he did end up killing that other dude with the bullet in the tree. It's like that intention magically, it didn't get him the first time, but that bullet still had that psychic charge on it, and got the guy. And it again, like what I was saying in the last one, is like consideration being senior to the physical universe. It's like somebody can put something out there magically, and that concept that they're putting out there magically, it finds a way to defy the logics and axioms of reality to manifest itself. Yeah. Like the bullet, or like it almost sounds like the two twins might have been the same being inhabiting two different bodies almost. That they both,
I often wonder that about twins.
It's like
a split consciousness.
Right.
My brother and my sister are twins. And so I can tell you firsthand what the twin phenomena is like. And it's uncanny. The things that they say and the way that they act and the things that they know about each other so my sister lives over in New York City, and my brother lives here in Seattle. And I'll be hanging out with my brother, and he'll just know something about my sister. And then all of a sudden she'll call.
Wow.
Instantly. And it's been like that. I'm 4 years older than they are. So it's been that way my entire life, as long as I've known them, which is my entire life.
So she's not a walk-in. But with that, it's just interesting that like familial ties like that, you can always have a psychic link in that way that defies mainstream paradigm understanding of science and everything. That there can be a psychic link like that, where there can be a knowingness there, just like moms always know when something's going on with their kid. There's always an awareness like that, and that goes outside of the understanding of things. But it could be something as mundane as the ability that thoughts have a certain wavelength to them, thoughts have a certain amplitude, and if blood relatives are tuned into each other well enough, they can perceive those psychic impressions. So it's like, blood relatives, or, magical partners, or people who've, troops that have served together have this kind of experience too, where they can see each other's mental pictures when they're out on a patrol or something. There's guys that have served that have these experiences where they can literally, the gentleman who's out on point, they can be sharing a psychic link there, where they're literally on the same wavelength and their perceptions are all moving as one. And it's one of those things where, whether you're in a fire team together, or you're in a magic circle together, or you're blood relatives, or you're best of friends, it's like people can tune in onto the same psychic wavelength. And I think this also happens too with egregores when people are working on a similar project, whether it's Jack Parsons and the Suicide Squad working on things. And then there's, the equivalent over on the other side of the war doing their thing. They might both be developing the same thing and working off of each other's progress along the way. Jack might have solved one problem that Werner von Braun over there might have been, racking his mind over, and wasn't able to come to it himself, but had the realization because Jack was over there doing that same kind of work. So like throughout history, I think there are numerous instances like that, where there might be people who are in no connection with each other at all, but they're in connection because of what they're working on. And because one is working on the thing, the other people who are in that same egregore benefit the same work from it. Just like that same kind of concept as like the sage who lives up on the hill, the hermit who lives on the hill, who works on himself, does his own shadow work, and helps all the people down the hill from him, work on their shadow work too, because of what he's doing with himself.
I think it was Colin Wilson in one of his books spoke about this thing that happened in the early 1900s. Lots of stories were written all over the world by different authors in different languages. And the same thing happened in every single story. A flying human being arrived on an island. And none of these, they couldn't have copied each other, because many of them didn't speak the same language or so on. but it was the same story appeared in all these different languages by all these different writers, and it involved a man coming to people on an island witnessing a flying man arriving.
Sorry, I missed the last part of what you said, Thomas.
No, it was the same story, and people on an island witnessing a flying man arriving. They'd all written it. All these different authors had written it all over the same story, all over the world at the same time in different languages, but the same exact scenario. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's like that thing of the collective unconscious, or something where people are, one person experienced it and it went throughout all those authors. Yeah, and I think that happens with people working along the same lines. It with engineering, like you can find similar memes and tropes across, or synchronicities within something that was developed by the Nazis that was also developed by the Americans, and at the same time people would think, oh, were there spies? And really maybe there weren't any spies sharing information back and forth between the rocketry teams, but just literally those groups of guys working on the same project were helping each other out psychically, and sharing
like
the same.
all the Operation Paperclip scientists probably came to America and discovered that the guys were continuing there what they'd already done, and they had just come over to finish it and dot the I's and underline line the T's.
Yeah. Yep. And then I think, in magic circles, that kind of stuff occurs too, where, people are sharing an egregore, and, what one side's doing, the other side's helping out. But I think that's a really cool thing too, like what Timony was talking about with her siblings that are twins. It's like, there's that shared consciousness thing. And, the two twins in the story having, marrying someone with a similar name and naming their kids the same thing.
Yeah. Wasn't Elvis, didn't he have a twin who died? I think.
I don't know.
Yeah, and he was seeing, people used to say that they used to see him talking to his twin brother in Graceland. Don't quote me on that, but like all the time, his twin was dead. His twin brother who died was with him psychically. Wow. Don't quote me on that. Someone would know better than me about look up Elvis. But yeah, he had a brother who died, and he people said and see him talking to him in Graceland and stuff like that. Wow.
Yeah, I bet Max Padron, or Padron, however you pronounce your name. Sorry if I butchered it. Question Max Padron. I know he's an Elvis expert, so if he's watching or tuning in, he'll have to let us know through DM or something later. Because, that's interesting, because it'd almost be like absorbing that second beingness into your awareness. So it's like he could almost use if that's true, he could have almost used that as a muse, like the two awarenesses working on the same problems at the same time.
Or the twin was still alive, and he was keeping it alive through that twin connection.
Right. Wow. Sharing one body.
Yeah, but he was like able to separate the consciousness or something. I'm sure there's probably lots of stories like that.
Yeah. Yeah, and I've heard the same thing. Two people have spoken recently about the two spirit thing within certain Native American cultures. Do you know anything about the whole two spirit thing?
Yeah, but I'm not an expert.
But that idea that like there's shamanic people, I want to say, of certain Native American tribes, and there are literally two entities living within a body, and I want to say it has something to do with one being able to exist in this world and one being able to exist in the astral, so to speak. But I would imagine like if there are, like a walk-in scenario where there's a human being going around and someone else walks into their body, there could be at least two awarenesses controlling that body. And one could be consciously, making sure the body's fed and clean and, has enough money made. And then there could be one working in the background, like the daemon, so to speak, that can be working on, whatever creative project. So.
Yep.
Well, we are 2 minutes away from the 2 hour mark. We did it again. How do you feel about the show?
Me?
Yeah.
I'm kind of like feeling a little pensive and weird after the end of it, because now my mind is off in kind of like philosophy land. But right. That's a good thing. That's not a bad thing. I'm sure many people watching the show and listening feel the same way too. We're here to not give you the strange, but we're here to make you think. Also. That's right.
Do you have
you're not being lectured to, you're being given inspiration.
Yeah, and brought into the conversation. These things are all off the cuff between all of us. We all talk throughout the week, but we never debrief about the show before it happens. And, you know, it's always as a surprise to each one of us as it is to everybody who's listening to it. So sometimes we get the shit shocked out of our own selves. And it's like,
I forgot to mention, everybody at the event was asking me about you two. You have a fan club in Ireland. They were asking about you two.
I have a weird feeling about the words or the word fan. I don't know. That's just weird to me. But
a supporters club.
Yeah, I like the word friends more.
Whatever.
And that's just me. That's just a me thing. I just need to get out of my head about it or whatever. But
everybody was asking about you too. So I thought that was kind of sweet.
Yeah. And anytime that happens, please like give them a hug and tell them that we appreciate them and, you know, can't wait to see them and all that good stuff.
Yeah, I don't know why anybody would be a fan of me. I'm such an asshole to everyone on Facebook. So, but I do appreciate that. I do have to. Sometimes I have to rein back my assholeness. But thank you to all of you who asked about me. I appreciate that. So, I do appreciate it.
And once again, Thomas, thank you so much for being here with us. We love the shit out of you. We love the shit out of everybody in the comment section. And somebody else is mad again, so that's cool. We love you guys, and we will see you next week. Bye.
Bye.
And don't go into the light.
No.